Hi, everybody. Eve Harow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. It is Friday, November 22nd, 24th day of Cheshvan, 5780. Taping this before Shabbat. I am sitting here in Ashdod, looking out on the magnificent sand dunes that Ashdod is known for, and the stunning Mediterranean just behind it. I'm here at the medical convention with my husband, who's a physician, and they have a weekend here, a Shabbat here in Ashdod. And it got me thinking, as usual, because my brain never seems to turn off, about our old enemies, the Philistines, the Philistines. Ashdod was one of their main cities. It's a port. It's one of Israel's main ports today. Gaza was the main port out in those days. And there's a museum up the road, which I'm going to jump into probably in a little while, about the Philistines. And they're in a museum while the Judeans are back and better than ever. So if you see history in a very, very long span, then the ironies just abound. But last night, of course, we got the news here in Israel that, and so did you, I'm sure, that the Prime Minister is going to be indicted in 3 cases. So still reeling from that, maybe to go along with my ocean theme, my sea theme. It's somewhat of a tsunami. You know, it's funny here because when you walk around in cities on the coast, they now have signs saying tsunami evacuation point, which seems like really funny because when you come to Israel, you're not really worried about tsunamis. And I think there's historical evidence that there was a tsunami, one tsunami in the Mediterranean, like thousands of years ago. So not really on our list of concerns. But you could say this is something, I guess, of a political tsunami. I have a lot of thoughts about it, which I'm not going to go into now. I want to talk to people about it during the coming week. Very disturbing, as you can imagine, but it's not also going to happen for a few months. So we've got some time to delve into this, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing about it ad nauseum from many political pundits. So we'll get to that another time. But you know how I always make sure to tell you guys when I'm taping something, if it's early, so that if something happens, you don't ask why I didn't mention it. Well, just yesterday, a couple of hours before the announcement, I was at the Jerusalem Post Diplomatic Conference. Got 2 great interviews, which I'm about to play for you, with Arsen Ostrovsky and Dr. Avi Bell, mainly about the issue of Pompeo's announcement that the United States does not think the settlements are illegal, about AntiSemitism in Europe, and the milder, if you would say, also the tsunami to some degree, but some of the things that were making the news this week before last night's announcement pushed everything down the headlines. So, you know, when I told people that we were coming to Ashdod for Shabbat, last weekend, Ashdod had iron domes, and because there were rockets being fired from Gaza. And somebody said to me, aren't you nervous to go to Ashdod? So I will admit that I did bring a nice pair of pajamas in case we have to leave our room in the middle of the night and go to the protected area in the hotel. You guys will know that by the time you hear this on Sunday. Like I said, I'm still taping this on Friday. But in general, that's not how most of us roll here in Israel. There's something going on somewhere all the time. And most of us just go about our business. I'm much more nervous when I leave Israel because I don't know what's going on and where the dangers are, not just as a woman, but just in general. The world is a dangerous place. So people have it in their heads that Israel is dangerous. And I guess on that level, you're probably not going to have rockets on you if you're in Alabama. And that's a good thing. And that shouldn't be allowed to happen here. So, but you know, we're coming to Ashdod. It's really a stunningly gorgeous day. When I finish this, I'm going to go for a walk in those sand dunes. Ashdod just won an award this week, as it happens, number 1 of Mediterranean cities for being environmentally conscious. So I thought that was funny, and I figured I needed to come and check it out for myself just to make sure it was good. But we just, I don't know, most of us just live our lives, do our day-to-day, and try not to let fear of the unknown drive us. So I'm anticipating a beautiful weekend. And if a lot of my countrymen have to live like this all the time, then every once in a while, I don't think it's going to hurt me to share in that experience and maybe to understand what they're going through, because that is how you build a nation, where everybody has to have empathy for the way other people are living, even if you're not in that situation most of the time. That's just how it is. It is Thursday, November 21st, another beautiful day, and I say that a little sadly because we do need it to rain, but it is a beautiful day in Jerusalem, and it's even nicer to be in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel at the Jerusalem Post yearly conference. And I managed to finally, because we've been circling around each other for a while, sit down with Arsen Ostrovsky, who has a very long list of accomplishments. We're going to try and focus on some. Executive Director of the Israeli Jewish Congress, Middle East Foreign Policy Analyst, International Human Rights Lawyer, and digital expert. And I'm sure that more than one of you, if you watch I-24 or a lot of the different news services coming out of Israel, have seen his face. So, Arsen, thank you so much for joining me here today. Sorry about the background noise. It looks like this is the best we're going to do.
Well, thank you for having me, Eve. First of all, it's definitely a great day to be in Jerusalem. Anytime you're in Jerusalem, but especially now, it's it doesn't matter. I live in Tel Aviv, but I come to Jerusalem, all the time, and it never ceases to give me goosebumps. Never ceases to, lift my spirits. So always great to be here, and it's great to finally, talk to you. I have followed your work for quite some time, so very happy to have a little conversation with you as well.
Okay, so the English comes from, because you're not a native Tel Avivan?
I'm not a native Tel Avivan, so I was born in Odessa, not far from where another great Zionist and one of my personal heroes, Jabotinsky, was born. But our family fled. We left in '87, and I grew up in Sydney, Australia. So I made Aliyah in 2012. At the time, I made Aliyah from New York, where I was working as a research fellow at a big think tank in New York. A lot of focus at the time on Israel and the United Nations, international law. And I've been in Israel for 7 years now, since 2012. Made Aliyah with Nefesh B'Nefesh, and this is home. There hasn't been a single dull day. Certainly no dull days now, that's for sure. But this is, for me, this is home, and it's not just the culmination of a dream, but for me, this is only the beginning of a dream, returning. It's a sense of home and life and purpose and meaning living here, so couldn't be happier.
Just to segue a little bit to Australia, it seems like there's a lot of Zionists in Australia, and I say that because I come from the United States, where unfortunately the Jewish community was once more Zionistic than they are today. But the Australians, I know some of that is because there's a lot of Holocaust survivors that went down to Australia, so they understand the importance of us having our own state. But do you think that made a difference to the person you are today because you grew up in Sydney? Do you have any way of checking that? Because you didn't have the alternate life. At least I assume you didn't. You look like you didn't. Your eyes aren't glowing any funny colors. But seriously, do you think that in Sydney, did you get Jewish education? It was your parents? Was it the community there? What do you think? Because it's more than you just making Aliyah. You are totally involved with defending and doing anything you can for the Jewish state. You're all in. So why do you think?
Look, there's a number of factors. First of all, I should say I'm also the Israel Affairs Director for the New South Wales Zionist Council. Look, for me personally, my family, our history, we fled anti-Semitism, so they knew very well what it meant to be Jews. And growing up in Australia, it was, an oasis, a perfect existence. My concerns there were, which pub do we go to after work, or I grew up in Bondi Beach, or, which football team do we follow. But I didn't go to a Jewish day school. And I didn't really go to a university that was heavily populated with a lot of Jewish students. In fact, when I graduated, I think the Jewish population halved. But for me, I was always very well aware of, our history and sort of the Zionist element. But for me, personally, the real turning point was around 2002. I was at university at the time, finishing. And if you remember the murder of American Jewish journalist Danny Pearl. And I remember watching that at the time, and his famous last words were, "My father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, I'm Jewish." And that really struck a chord with me, because it made me, it awoke me, and it made me think, what does it mean to be a Jew? What does Zionism mean? What does Israel fit into all this? And that really sort of started a whole process of self-education and learning with the birthright, Messiah, and so on, sort of culminating a number of years later with me making Aliyah. But, on a whole, as a Jewish community in Australia, year after year, Australia is considered one of the most Zionist communities. That's for a number of reasons. You mentioned Holocaust survivors. Per capita outside of Israel, Australia has the most Holocaust survivors in the world per capita. We've always enjoyed very strong bipartisan political support. We have managed to integrate, a lot of refugees, a lot of the Muslim communities very well integrated, and we get on, in fact, very well with them. Anti-Semitism, although it's rising, it's a concern, it's certainly nowhere near what is happening in other parts of the world, say Europe or Australia. Jewish education is a very, very large component of what's happening in Australia. A lot of kids go to Jewish day schools, a lot of them go to camps, a lot of them go to Israel programs, so it creates a very vibrant, very strong, I think, Jewish and Zionist community.
So you mentioned anti-Semitism, and I know that's one of your focuses. Are you concerned about Europe in particular?
Europe, very concerned. In a few months or next year, we're going to be marking 75 years since the end of the Shoah. And when we're looking around what's happening today, where anti-Semitism is, at peak levels, the UK, record levels. We look at what's happening in Germany, not just the horrific Yom Kippur attack on the synagogue. Hardly a day seemingly goes by when I don't read that in Germany a Jew is assaulted for speaking Hebrew, wearing a kippah. In places like Belgium, I've had someone tell me that they're afraid to put a mezuzah on their door because it's like putting a bullseye. But the concern is, the anti-Semitism in Europe. I mean, Europe is not homogenous, and it's coming from different sides. It's coming from a rise of the far-right neo-Nazis, like we saw in the attack in Germany. It's coming from elements from the Muslim community, like we're seeing in France, in Belgium. It's coming from the far left, like we're seeing, for example, in the UK right now, with the UK Labour Party and in parts of Spain and other parts. So there's no one solution fits all. So in one way, it's this resurgence of just pure, unadulterated Jew hatred, neo-Nazism, Holocaust denial, attacks on synagogues where it's easy to pinpoint. But it's also, as we're seeing, through attacks on, through BDS, through attacks on Zionism, this old anti-Semitism masquerading as a new anti-Semitism, sort of hiding behind, anti-Zionism, when it's really no different, when it's really, instead of attacking the Jew as an individual, they're attacking Israel as the Jew amongst the nations, as Professor Owen Kotler once famously coined. So it's very difficult. There's no one solution fits all. And, we have to work with the Jewish communities. We have to work with the pro-Israel allies. We have to work with the parliamentarians. So there are people that, there's a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of supporters with whom we need to work to empower and amplify their voices as well.
So apropos BDS, this was a very interesting week because you had a juxtaposition of the Europeans saying that we had to label now, because of the Psagot winery, we have to label things coming out of the settlements, with Pompeo in the United States saying, for the first time, the settlements are not illegal. So how do you, and just within a few days of each other, so how do you see that?
Look, the timing was interesting. From what I understand, both decisions had been forthcoming some time, and the US decision, it didn't happen overnight. It was something that was in the works for many months, and it was meant to be, as I understand, released a week ago, but then, of course, Palestinian Islamic Jihad decided to fire a few rockets, 450 plus rockets. It is definitely a juxtaposition, and we're certainly seeing where both sides stand. It was days after the US, it shouldn't come as a surprise what they said. The Jewish people do have an inextricable and undeniable connection to the communities in Judea and Samaria, and what they said was that it is these communities and settlements are not per se illegal. There is a lot of dispute. Okay, I can handle that. Whereas the European reflexive position has been, as was demonstrated just overnight at the Security Council, where 14 countries of the Security Council, the US being the only one that obviously disagreed, said that we unequivocally disagree and we believe that the settlements are illegal and illegitimate under international law. And what I found was very interesting, just a few hours ago at the diplomatic conference here with Jerusalem Post, the German ambassador was asked about the European Court of Justice decision about Psagot wine. And she had said that I found it very curious that this was not a decision about Israel. And I thought for a second, well, hold on. What was it about if it wasn't about Israel? What was it about if the court wasn't specifically, it was framed as a consumer protection sort of decision? It's so much more. It was literally, it singles out Jewish communities, by the way, and only Jewish communities. It singles out Israel and only Israel amongst the countless dozens of international disputes, Western Sahara, Northern Cyprus, you name it, we can go on and on and on. So it singles out Israel, and it singled out specifically the Jewish communities. If it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. So I don't think there's any other way to frame it other than about Israel and specifically about Jewish communities. So it's very disappointing. But there are, the Netherlands very quickly actually came out and said, the Dutch Parliament, we disagree with this decision. I believe others within Europe, certainly friendly governments, will follow. And it's important, I think, for us to remember that, it's easy sometimes to assume, certainly when looking at Europe, that Israel is like a fish in an open sea, that we're alone. I don't quite believe that, and I'm not ready to give up. There are a lot of challenges. I think within the EU infrastructure, certainly within Brussels and some of the Western European countries, it is difficult for us to have our case heard, but we have a lot of friends within Eastern Europe, within other parts throughout Central Europe and elsewhere, people who support us, not just within the governmental framework, but pro-Israel groups who are saying, now we've had groups coming to us saying, what is this Psagot wine, for example, and where can we buy some? Right. Which is fantastic, so in some ways, it's also shed a light and hopefully can also draw positive attention where people are saying, where can we buy this wine? So hopefully that can be a bonus for them as well.
Yeah, I remember that happened when there were Jews living in Gush Katif in Gaza before they got thrown out in 2005. I remember there was some kind of sticker that also went on their products because they exported to Europe, and their things flew off the shelves faster because up until then there had been some kind of conglomerate, I guess it was a Grexco, that was marketing all Israeli cherry tomatoes together. And when they singled out the Gush Katif cherry tomatoes because of where they came from, everyone knew that those were the best, and they bought those first. So it was actually other Israeli farmers who insisted that the sticker get taken off because it was hurting their sales. So stranger things have happened and continue to happen.
There's a great initiative now, boycott, boycott, where, they want to use this against us. We're going to turn it around against them. Mm-hmm. If they say, we don't want you to sell this, we want you to label this, we don't want you to buy this, so, we're going to shed light on this. And the contrary, we're going to get people to come to the stores. We're going to get them to buy them and buy them in boxes, and we're seeing that already happening, and it happened with SodaStream, it happened with other products, and it's certainly, and hopefully will happen now if that is something that is indeed pursued further.
So one of the frustrating things that you and I both feel as Israelis that we essentially haven't had a government in over 6 months. It looks like we're heading to third election. Some of the speeches here today, Gideon Sa'ar pretty much made it clear he'd like to take over the Likud from the current Prime Minister. Do you think, given the atmosphere of kind of we don't know what's going on, do you think the Israeli government of today can take advantage of what the Americans said and maybe start applying Israeli law at least to Area C, let's say starting with the Jordan Valley, which everybody agrees is of security need? Because just to play devil's advocate for a minute, and I've lived in Efrat, which is a settlement since 1988, and very involved in feel that Jews should never be moved from Judea and Samaria. But the question is, are we asking people to be more Catholic than the Pope? If our own Israeli government isn't willing to say, you mentioned that the German ambassador said, well, it's not really a part of Israel. I can see in her mind she's saying, well, there's Israel, and then there's post-67, and I'm not counting that as Israel. The Israeli government doesn't really either. We live in this weird netherworld. So do you see that given what's happening here in Israel, there's a chance to take advantage of the situation, or the opposite? Nobody's got the guts to do it now because we don't know where we're going.
Look, I wish I was optimistic. There are so many amazing opportunities coming, not least from the United States and others who are coming to us and saying, we want to work with you, we want to bring investments in, we want to initiate diplomatic actions. But at the end of the day, it's very regrettable, but we have what essentially is it's a sense of paralysis. And if it's going to go into a third election, which will go at least through March, it's going to make it very complicated. We want to bring groups here. We want to bring MKs and ministers from Israel. People and friends and allies are asking us from Europe, can you help us, bring Israeli leaders? And we say we'd love to, but we can't. It's very difficult. We brought groups to the Knesset, but we couldn't hold an event there because it was in a flux of election and we had to go outside. We work with different committees who are, for example, one of them is the European Forum of the Knesset, which actually works to strengthen relations between Israel and the EU. But we're hamstrung, we're paralyzed because we can't do anything now. So there's a lot of opportunities, and not just opportunities, a lot of challenges and a lot of threats we have to face, not just from BDS and various diplomatic initiatives against us as well. We have a fantastic civil service and professionals who are fighting every day, and bless them. But unfortunately, we don't have a fully functioning government. and there is a sense of paralysis. And I hope that some kind of agreement is found, and we can get back to business as usual.
So while we focus on the United States and Australia and on Europe, we are in the Middle East, and our neighbors, it's hard, totally. We're in the Middle East, and our neighbors have had the nasty tendency, especially in the last few months, to shoot at us whenever they want to. So are you finding people nervous about coming here for that reason? And I'm thinking this because I'm about to go to Ashdod for the weekend, which last weekend a lot of people spent their time in the bomb shelters. And as Israelis, we pretty much don't think about it. I mean, you were in Tel Aviv. I don't know if you heard sirens there as well.
First of all, I was in Tel Aviv at the time, and there was there was a siren. It was early in the morning, I think Monday, Tuesday, and actually my, it's life in Israel. I suppose I'm not unique. It was me, my wife, our daughter, who's not even 3 years old, and my parents-in-law were there, and the siren went off. What do? We live in an apartment on the second floor, third floor. And, what do? We don't have enough time to get to the shelter. And, got to make sure my wife, my daughter, my parents-in-law, our dog, our neighbor is 95 years old.
Within 30 seconds to 45, maybe.
Something seconds, what do you do? These are the day-to-day decisions we face. In Tel Aviv, it's, not something that's a daily occurrence. To, our brothers and sisters in the south and central Tel Aviv, it's unbearable almost... daily what they had to go through, not just these 2 days, but through the years, countless number of rockets. So it's definitely part of life here. But at the same time, I feel 100% safe. And I'll give an example. A few days ago, I attended the launch of the Arizona Israel Investment and Trade Office launch in Tel Aviv. There were dozens and dozens of people came from Arizona, from America, including parliamentarians from across the board, people in the business community, and they'd been there already for a few days. And the trip was obviously been planned for some time. And, I asked one of them, you guys weren't concerned, you weren't scared? And they said, no, absolutely not. We came here to show our support with Israel because we want to work with Israel. We only want to strengthen this. So I thought that was incredible. So I think from a lot of people... those that are maybe uninformed about the situation, and that's certainly a challenge for us to inform people better about what is happening here on the ground, and not just from a security perspective, but everything from diplomatic, from day-to-day life, from life in Efrat to life in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and everywhere else in between, to know that, it's absolutely safe here. It's certainly, I feel safer here than I do in many parts in Europe or even North America.
And it's at least an open secret in Israel that while it's little shoo-shoo and it's not in the news, we have relationships with our neighbors, that there are trucks that, there are boats that dock in Haifa and Ashdod and unload many, many things every single day that make its way across to Israel and then through Jordan and are dispersed around the Middle East, and that we're doing whatever we can on the intelligence level, I'm sure also between the Shias and the Sunnis and everybody around. We are very much an integral part of the Middle East, even though it can't be talked about. How are you able to let people know that in some kind of way that we're an island, but we're not really an island. In some ways, we are not in some ways. We are the most stable country in the Middle East right now, and the one that is definitely the only democracy and leader of human rights anywhere. Do people get that, or do they just kind of see it superficially like a plague on all your houses? No,
I think people are getting it and are seeing it. There's a... from some elements, people are saying that Israel is isolated. I don't believe that for a second. We certainly have some diplomatic challenges, don't get me wrong. But, what I'm seeing with the Gulf countries who openly saying something that was a secret before or under the table or non-existent, they're saying, we want to work with Israel. We want to trade. We see that there is an economical imperative, whereas once the Palestinian issue was sort of like this wall, this barrier, they're also getting fed up and frustrated with the Palestinians when they're seeing their money going to them, and what is it being used for? To pay salaries of terrorists. The conflict continues to go on. But whereas they're saying, we can actually work with them. They're openly recognizing Israel. So I think that's fantastic. We're seeing what's happening in Africa. We're seeing what's happening in South America with not just Guatemala, but embassies and trade offices opening up. Parts of Central Europe, who are standing up for Israel within the EU. So there's a lot of incredible things that are happening, and we certainly need to shed more light. India is another example I should add, not just our trade with India that's skyrocketing. We're seeing, change in voting patterns at the UN with India, with Brazil, even just now. Once they were voting no, then they're abstaining, and now they're voting with Israel in some respects even. So this kind of change, it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary, and it takes time. But there's certainly, I'm an optimist at heart. I'm a pragmatist as well. But, we have to deal with the facts on the ground and the challenges. But at the same time, I'm optimistic about Israel's future. I'm optimistic about our ability to deal with the security challenges and also to grow as a country, as a people as well.
Okay. So you would recommend that people move here if they wanted. It's a good place.
Israel...
Not because of anti-Semitism. People shouldn't be running away. People should be able to be free, to be Jews, to have a mezuzah on their door, a kippah on their head, wherever they live. But this is such an exciting, vibrant country. This shouldn't just be the last stop when you've got no place else to go.
Yeah, look, you're right. Israel will always be the refuge and a home for the Jewish people, wherever they are. If it's from anti-Semitism or for whatever reason, Israel will always be their home. But absolutely, we want people to make Aliyah out of a position of strength and want and desire because they want to live here and because they want to fulfill this, Zionist dream that I was proud to do so myself. And, for me, it was, it's a sense of belonging and sense of returning home and a sense of, being able to have a direct say after 2,000 years. Our people... modern state of Israel is only 71 years old. So there was a time when we didn't have a voice, we didn't have independence or sovereignty, an army, a parliament. We have all that now. So I think we, in many ways, have a duty and responsibility to speak up and stand up for Israel. And that's certainly something that motivates me.
If someone's listening and wants to be in touch with you, either because they're involved with some organization that maybe they want to bring here or admire the work that you're doing, can they do that? And how would they? Absolutely.
They can send me an email at ostrov at ijc.org.il, or they can always find me on Twitter with my tag at Ostrov_A.
Okay. Thank you so much, and for all the hard work that you do. And we do have challenges, but we're meeting them. And right now, we're going to lunch. So thank you so much, Arsen Ostrovsky. I really appreciate the time.
Right, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on and all the amazing work you do, bringing a voice to so many wonderful things that are happening here.
That's what you have, your thing that you do, and this is clearly what I'm supposed to be doing. So thank you so much.
This week on Israel Uncensored with Josh Haston, an interview with Oren Hasson of the Lone Soldier Center in memory of Michael Levine, helping immigrant soldiers and those without families.
During their service, when they come home from base and they have nobody to talk to, they have us. It's amazing to be able to connect the Marines from the U.S. and the IDF soldiers to come together on an event like this.
For the full show, download Israel Uncensored with Josh Haston on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
Hi, everybody. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. I'm at the Jerusalem Post Diplomatic Conference at the Waldorf Astoria. Post about 10 desserts. They have such good food here. Anyway, so I'm on my sugar high, and I grabbed lawyer Avi Bell, whom I've interviewed before. The poor guy has the misfortune of not only being very involved with a lot of interesting things happening, but I know him, so I chase him around. Anyhow, so Avi, thanks so much for joining me again today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So just in the few minutes that we have, the big news, right, that the Pompeo said settlements aren't illegal. So I know this is something that you've worked with, been involved with for many years. How are you feeling today?
I think it's a wonderful announcement. I actually think there's two pieces to the announcement that are worth paying attention to. The first part is he said that there's nothing illegal about settlements. He's absolutely right. But we should note that in saying that, he's not really breaking new ground. That's the traditional U.S. position, with the exception of the Carter and Obama administrations, which took a harder line on Israel. But everyone else, going back to the Johnson administration, have not found Israeli settlements to be illegal. And so we're really just getting back to the norm. It's a good norm, but that's the smaller bit, in my opinion. The larger bit is that Pompeo pointed out, and I think it's very important, that all this rhetoric about settlements being an obstacle to peace is really misplaced. There's nothing about settlements that makes it more difficult to reach peace, and it's time to stop giving the Palestinians this excuse for refusing to negotiate.
Well, if anything, if the settlements are illegal, then default mode is this must be Palestine that the Jews somehow stole, and then there's no reason to have negotiations because we moved into somebody's house and we've got to get thrown out. So if anything, this maybe will work us towards some kind of arrangement that leads to coexistence.
I think that the rhetoric of settlements being illegal is used to cover up all sorts of other things. And so it's very uncomfortable for the Palestinians to have to explain to a Western audience why it is that they feel that no Jews should be allowed to live in any of the land that they covet. Whether they think it's theirs or not, they just it doesn't make any sense, I think, to the Western ear. And so they have to develop this argument about international law that makes it sound softer. We're not saying that Jews can't live there. We're just saying no settlements, which are illegal, and the result is that Jews can't live.
And an obstacle to peace, which we hear all the time.
Right, and it also, because it's illegal, they have the excuse of saying, well, it's an obstacle to peace. Everybody understands you can't leave these illegal things there, the illegal babies. Now, taking that away, I think, brings us back to the core of the issue. Either the Palestinians are going to reach an agreement in which they'll agree to coexist with a Jewish state or not. And whether there are Jews living in their ancestral land or not, whether it's in this particular place, that particular place, how many of them, those are not the core issues. The core issues are they willing to live with any Jews having a state? The moment that they're willing to turn that corner, then all the other little details can be worked out.
So I'm of the opinion, maybe you share it, that this is not going to get worked out. That they can't, because of who they are, allow any kind of Jewish state anywhere in the Middle East, and that this isn't about peace at all. It's about eradicating Israel and replacing it with some kind of Palestine, which anyhow wouldn't exist for 5 minutes because the rest of the Arab world would just attack and the whole thing would just be even a bigger mess than it is today.
I'm an optimist. I would like to feel that people can change. I don't see any sign to date that the Palestinians have come to terms with Jewish independence and Jewish self-determination in a Jewish state and Jews returning to their ancient homeland. But I'm hopeful that it could change. What I'm absolutely certain about is that it won't change until there's no option to continue on the current path. And so as long as they're told that there's a way around negotiating in good faith, they can continue sponsoring terrorism, they can continue engaging in anti-Semitic and anti-Israel activities, and there will be no penalty, I think that it's unlikely that they will turn the corner. I am optimistic, however, that the day will come that they will see things differently.
Okay, well, that would be nice. It should be in our lifetimes. But, I've been talking to people here in the conference today, and one of the things that keeps coming up is that this isn't, the United States didn't do this for Israel. I mean, I think it was a wonderful thing, but this is for the United States. Let's say, for example, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Was that for Israel? Was that to make Israel feel good? Or is the American administration doing things that they think is good for the United States?
Well, I think there are two pieces to the Trump administration's policy, and I think they're both centered in the United States. One of them is that there's a very large constituency of Americans who believe that this is the right thing to do, and they're waiting for an administration that carries out their values and their understanding of the just and moral requirements of American behavior in the region. They're primarily evangelical Zionists, which is a very, very large group, but it's also other Americans besides that who understand that this is the right thing to do, and the Trump administration is doing this for them. The other thing that the Trump administration is doing is it's trying to better act according to American interests in the region, and the American interests, at least as the Trump administration understands it, and as I understand it as well, are not served by appeasing the most intransigent groups and helping terrorists, overlooking their terrorism or shoving aside their terrorism. The best way to advance American interests is to be frank about it, that the United States is looking out for what is right for the United States, what is right for U.S. allies, and what is right for U.S. values.
Do you think that this will kick off something? I mean, I don't know about Europe because we have at the same time the whole thing with the Psagot winery and labeling things from the settlements. But do you think that other countries might now follow the United States lead, maybe Australia or maybe other countries, democratic countries, or even not democratic countries, but countries that have in the last decade, let's say, built up relationships with Israel?
I don't know about that. Again, this is not an entirely new position. It has been the traditional position of the United States since the Johnson administration that settlements are not illegal. And what we're really doing is returning to a norm. And if you look against that background, most states have been perfectly comfortable ignoring the truth, ignoring the United States, ignoring international law, and continuing to claim that settlements are illegal. And so I wouldn't expect anything to change overnight. However, there are massive changes going on in policy towards Israel, particularly in the Arab world, where the Arab states are beginning to come off their implacable hostility and starting to take a more realistic and open stance towards Israel. And so I do think that moves like this have the potential over the long run of changing things.
You really are an optimist. But no, when we live here in Israel, we do see that. And it might be realpolitik, and that's fine too. And it might be because Israel economically has something to give these countries, and that's fine too. For many years, we were told, one day we're going to eat hummus in Damascus, and the Syrians will love us. Okay, I don't think anybody's eating hummus in Damascus these days, and we don't need people to love us. We need people to not want to kill us and not force us into a position of having to defend ourselves. I know that sounds very basic and maybe a little pathetic. That's all I want.
I think that in being an optimist, one has to bear in mind there are also potential threats. And I don't believe that it is possible at this point or at any point that we can see in the near future to engage in fancies of immediate peace and eating hummus in Damascus and laying down our arms. That said, there's a power simply to saying the truth, to recognizing the situation that is around us. And I don't think the situation is dire. I think it is actually very hopeful. We have a stronger Jewish state in Israel than has existed in any time in the last, I can't think how many, at least several millennia. There's signs of things moving in a very, very good direction. I think we have to recognize them and work with them.
Okay, so one last question. What do you think about the winery, the whole thing with labeling the settlement products that came out of the EU last week?
Well, just very simply, a labeling requirement is what is called under international law a technical barrier to trade. And that's what all these European moves are about. They're barriers to trade with Israel. They're a way of putting on limited economic sanctions on Israel. And what the European Union's Court of Justice did last week was perfectly predictable. It's the kind of thing that the Europeans have been doing, the EU in particular has been doing for quite a number of years, several decades. These small, incremental anti-Israel steps where they use all sorts of rhetoric to obscure the fact that they're targeting particularly the Jewish state, and what they're doing is illegal. I don't expect that anything that's happened since then will change the European course. That is the course they're on. What I will say is the more resistance they meet, the slower they go. They're not going to become pro-Israel. But their anti-Israel moves the pace of their anti-Israel moves is dictated by the amount of resistance they run into. And the more they're criticized, the more it's pointed out that what they're doing is biased and illegal, the less quickly they will move in that direction. And so I think it's good that the United States criticize them for it. I think it'll be good that other actors criticize them for it. I think it's wonderful that the parliament in the Netherlands adopted a non-binding resolution asking the government not to follow this decision. I think it'll be very good if other European states follow in that direction. Discriminating against trade from Israel is not a good direction for anyone to go.
Okay. Dr. Avi Bell, thank you so much. You just said it perfectly. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed both those interviews. Really, really great guys. You should follow their work. Dr. Avi Bell, one of the premier international lawyers in the world, also teaching, involved at Harvard, no less. And Arsen Ostrovsky, just involved in so many things having to do with PR and exposing, as he mentioned in the interview, and exposing Israel to as many people as possible. And he really, it's hard for me to explain it because you weren't sitting with him, but he just breathes Zionism. I mean, talking to him is like, I'm seeing a reflection of myself just in a tall Australian guy with less hair, more intelligence, and just lives in Tel Aviv. But other than that, it was like, whoa, I get this. I get where he's coming from. Where love of Israel, love of the Jewish people just is what drives him all the time. I totally related to that. So anyhow, he's great, and you should be following his work. And if you happen to be in Israel this week, on Thursday, which is the United States Thanksgiving Day, but Thursday, I am going to be running a joint tour down to the Jordan Valley with Naomi Khan of Rejuvenation. We're going to be looking at the illegal Palestinian Arab building, which does violate all international law in the Jordan Valley, and some of the projects that One Israel Fund is doing in the very legal communities. So first time we're running a joint tour like that. I'm really looking forward to doing that. She's great. Rejuvenation is an amazing organization. So if you're in Israel this Thursday, join us. There are still a few seats left on the bus. So hope to see you then. If not, I have a Hanukkah tour for One Israel Fund coming up December 26th, I believe. It's Thursday of Hanukkah. Just put that out. It's out being advertised. You can go to the One Israel Fund website and sign up for that. And working on 2 trips for the end of January, just putting the final touches on January 19th to Herodian, to Stay Bar, to the Aragot Farm, and then kicking around the ideas for January 23rd. But I think here I just might have lit on something. To be announced. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Shavua Tov, everybody. Have a great week. Goodbye for now.
Prime Minister Netanyahu,
Benny Gantz,
Avigdor Lieberman,
Yair Lapid.
Will the people of Israel have a government soon? Will it be a unity government? Will it be a right-wing government? Will it be a left-wing government with Arab support? Or will we be going to elections on Purim? Find out by listening to